Do you remember Sister Location, the 5th installment of Five Nights at Freddy's? If you don't count FNAF World, which you should. For a while, there's been a little debate about this game and its setting in particular. As strange as it is, this game is technically one of the most straightforward in the entire franchise. We play as Michael Afton going into the bunker that's either nearby or inside of our house, to do what William Afton told us to do, to, quote, put her back together. But there's always been two glaring issues with this narrative. One, its placement in the timeline. When does this game happen? We know this game turns Michael from an is into a was, and then into an again, but the when of this whole scenario is difficult to pin down. The other issue with this game has always been its plausibility. We know that this bunker, even if the game itself takes place much later in the timeline, would have been built sometime around the 70s or 80s. But if that's the case, why is it so futuristic? Everything in here looks straight out of a science fiction novel. Was William Afton just that technologically advanced? Our best guess up until now was, I guess so, just move on. But now, I think we have a new answer. It's a little bit out there and some of you are going to hate it. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I fully believe it, but I still think it's worth talking about. And there's the chance that if today's theory is right, everything we knew about Sister Location is wrong. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Sister Location takes place in Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, an underground bunker where the animatronics originally meant for Circus Baby's pizza world were held. They're meant to be rented out during the day for private parties. Of the main cast, there's Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, and Circus Baby. All but Funtime Foxy have some sort of minion. Circus Baby has the Biddy Babs, Ballora has the Mini Renas, and Funtime Freddy has Bon Bon and Bonette. There's one more cast member we never get to actually see in the game though, and no, I'm not talking about Funtime Chica. We see her in Ultimate Custom Night and she doesn't line up with what we are about to talk about, the Springlock suit Night 4. Circus Baby tells us that it was built for her original pizzeria, but it was never properly used. It doesn't match anyone we see at the bunker, but it does tell us that the original restaurant was built early enough to have Springlock suits. After all, we know they were decommissioned at some point thanks to the FNAF 3 audio recordings. Hand Unit also tells us that the original restaurant was opened, quote, due to the massive success and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. So we're looking for a timeline placement that's before the Springlock suits were decommissioned, but after Freddy's location shut down, which realistically gives us one option. Again, we're not yet talking about when Sister Location the game happens, just when Circus Baby's Pizza World was opened, or at least planned to open. Because as a reminder, the restaurant closed and canceled itself shortly before its grand opening, blaming gas leaks at the area and people saying they saw strange things happening around the restaurant at night. So that grand opening, by my guess, seems to take place somewhere around the 80s, specifically 1980 to 1987. 1983 marks the first time we see the real world in the timeline via the FNAF 4 minigames. And the crying child frequently goes to what can be assumed as a Fredbear's Family Diner, seeing as it's just Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. But on the TV, he's watching Freddy and Friends, which does imply that a Freddy's location might already exist by 1983, as far as we're aware. But to further back this up, we know the collectible coin in Help Wanted says Freddy Fazbear's Pizza since 1983. So that could imply that that bite on 1983 is what spawned the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. So most likely we're talking probably 1985, 1986. Now, as far as the Springlock suits go, we don't know exactly when they were decommissioned, but we know they were decommissioned while a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was active, because the voice recordings in FNAF 3 that talk about them were recorded for a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And we know by the time of FNAF 2, November 1987, they'd been decommissioned for so long that the phone guy just refers to them as a yellow suit in the back. So either he doesn't know what they are and this is a different phone guy, or he assumes no one else really knows what they are and he doesn't bother explaining it. So that's the placement of Circus Baby's Pizza World, but as far as the actual placement of the game itself, that gets a lot fuzzier. The only thing we know by absolute certain is by the time the game begins, Elizabeth is definitely dead, and Michael Afton is still in contact with William. In Sister Location, we see a recreation of Elizabeth dying to the hands of Circus Baby, and we can note that in that minigame, Baby's eyes are blue, but every time we see her after, they're green. Notably, Elizabeth in that minigame's eyes are also green, which implies that Elizabeth has possessed Circus Baby by the time we meet her, implying that she's dead. As far as Michael goes, he just straight up tells us,
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to.
so he went down there at his father's instruction. And we know for a fact that at the end of Sister Location, all the Funtimes leave the facility as entered. They also leave Michael as a used human sock of a person, but he's still alive somehow. And since it's incredibly likely that Michael was at the FNAF 6 fire, as well as Circus Baby or what's left of her, and Ennard or what's left of him, we know that Sister Location has to take place after Elizabeth's death, but before FNAF 6. But that's kind of all we know about placement, which isn't incredibly helpful when you could argue that we don't even know the order, let alone the dates of the important deaths of the beginning of this franchise, namely Elizabeth, Crying Child, and Charlotte Emily. So that's been issue 1. The timeline here is questionable at best. Problem 2 has always been the setting. When we first saw the trailer with these incredibly advanced animatronics and saw this high-tech underground bunker, a lot of us thought this whole game would have been a time skip way into the future. So imagine the confusion when it's likely that this takes place somewhere in the middle of the timeline, most likely somewhere from the 70s to 90s. Something never felt right about this place. Sure, you could just chalk it up to Scott having an inkling for science fiction, see Desolate Hope for examples of that, and also just kind of stretching the truth. After all, we're playing a game about haunted Charles Entertainment cheese alternates. So, like, realism be damned, who cares? The technology in this game is the least unbelievable part about it. But still, this felt a bit too far, at least for me. It was too futuristic, and the animatronics were so chrome and polished. They could do incredible things, something about them didn't line up. But ever since the game came out, we only really had one explanation. They just can move on, which is fair if we had no other evidence to explain these things. Then I guess that's the best we could do. And that was the current state of Sister Location for the most part. Incredibly straightforward in some aspects and incredibly vague in others. Just how I like my FNAF games. So the theorizing about this game sort of took a back seat until now. In the past few years, we've received 2 different explanations for how Sister Location could have functioned. The second one is what we're primarily here to talk about today, but I'd be remiss to not mention the first, Help Wanted. In the intro to the only VR game in the franchise, until December, looking at you, Help Wanted 2. Honestly surprised Casey lasted that long. Usually he wants to play sooner. We're pretty much immediately introduced to how meta this game is going to be. Off rip, it tells us that this is an actual in-universe VR game, based around actual in-universe indie devs made by some lunatic in an attempt to smear the Fazbear brand. We later learned that this lunatic was actually hired by Fazbear to cover up real events that happened in the timeline, trying to convince the masses that these were just fictional games and these things actually didn't really happen. This threw a big ol' wrench into the narrative of these games. Some theorists believe that this is Scott's way of telling us that that era of FNAF has ended and that story is finished, and then all the pieces that are in there can be solved with those games. I think that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think we can still work with these games. Personally, for a while, I've just been assuming that this is Scott's way of telling us, hey, we are trying to continue telling this massive, sprawling, mysterious story. So if we get some minor things wrong from the original games, just put that under the blanket of the indie dev who made them didn't know any better. So those games did happen, they're just not perfectly accurate anymore. And since Circus Baby, Funtime Freddy, and a whole recreation of Funtime Foxy's Auditorium are in Help Wanted, Sister Location fits squarely in there. Oh, and Ennard's there too. So again, Help Wanted implies that Sister Location is one of the indie games. So you could take that and run with it. You could just say, oh, well, the timeline placement and the weird futuristic tech can just be explained by the indie game dev. He didn't know any better. And frankly, that was really the only evidence-backed explanation we had for these questions until next month, when a book coming out gives us another one. So I'm going to be moving into light spoiler territory for a book that has not come out yet. Tales from the Pizzaplex number 8, B7-2. The story's leaked early, and as much as I don't like to talk about leaked stories, I kind of have to say algorithmically relevant, so here we are. Hey guys, next time can we not leak the stories months in advance so I can actually talk about the book when it comes out? Thanks. Anyway, I won't mention what stories or characters I'm talking about to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but fair warning, this might spoil one of the stories for you. One of the stories gives us a new feature to the FNAF universe, a rule we didn't know about up until now, and it's important to today's theory. In fact, today's theory entirely hinges upon its existence: hallucinogenic gas. One of the stories in this book tells us experiments that nearly 100% line up with what we see in FNAF 4. The story itself has a kid running around a dingy recreation of a household, all the while nightmare gas is being pumped inside to make it look either real in the daytime or horrifically terrifying at night. All the while, the only real thing coming at him famous marionettes on tracks. This hallucinogenic gas was pumped in to make everything look more realistic. That way, William Afton could do experiments on fear. We also learned that this experiment chamber was directly connected to the sister location bunker. So with all this information, the question then presents itself. What if the gas leak cover story used to close Circus Baby's pizza world wasn't entirely false? If we are to assume what we see in FNAF 4 is a real experiment, or at least nightmares based off of real experiments, and that the location that these experiments were held in is attached to the sister location bunker, a point backed up by the fuse map within sister location itself, then this nightmare gas would likely have been stored in the facility. If that gas began to leak, the whole facility would become one giant nightmare chamber, one with actually dangerous animatronics stored inside. What would be real? What would be fake at that point? If anyone went down there, there's a chance you wouldn't make it back up. You would end up just wandering aimlessly around the halls, terrified of random things that move and not seeing things that do. If there really was a gas leak at Circus Baby's Pizza World, it could have been the nightmare gas. After all, people reported seeing weird things at night. That could have just been a side effect from the light exposure they were getting being close to the building emitting this gas. This could even explain one other issue I've yet to bring up. There's one more question that's always bugged me about sister location. Why? Why didn't William go down to the bunker himself instead of sending Michael? Everything down there was of the utmost importance, a culmination of his life's work, his chance to erase the fates and bring back both of his dead children. Why would he ever entrust it to his oldest son, who he blames for killing his youngest? Why not just finish the job himself? He was obviously close. Michael was able to free these animatronics in less than a week. Now we might have the answer: the gas. William knows that this gas causes horrific hallucinations. He's the one experimenting on children with it in the first place. If he noticed the gas began to leak and made his escape, the only way to check on it would be to put on a gas mask and go back down there yourself. But then, one mistake, one slip up, and it's all over. He'd be trapped in a nightmare dungeon of his own design, left to either starve or get killed by an animatronic. That would be too much of a risk. He would need someone else to do it. Someone who already kind of knows what's going on, but he's willing to lose. His eldest son, Michael. The one that he believes caused the crying child's death. And if my theory is correct, go watch it here, the son who he'd already been experimenting on with the nightmare gas. Hell, if it did leak down there, maybe his son has a tolerance to the stuff. He could be even more effective than some random off the street. He would just send Michael down there to continue doing the work. But when Michael went down there, the landscape changed and morphed into something futuristic and high-tech. The bare-bones elevator that had been hobbled together turned into this futuristic air-conditioned ride. The plain wallpaper and tile floors looked more like sleek metal siding. The specific and effective scooper that his father designed looked more like a snapping turtle's jaw. Michael was seeing the shape and purpose of this area, but not its true nature. Yes, this theory's proposing that what we see at the end of Ruin is the sister location bunker without the influence of nightmare gas. Still unbelievably advanced for the time, but at least theoretically possible to be built. Remember the Help Wanted 2 trailer. We see the sister location elevator and immediately hear a hissing sound that sounds like gas being emitted, or at least leaking. But if this is truly what the sister location bunker looks like and how it operates, what is going on in sister location and how does this answer our questions about the game? We'll start with our earlier questions. 1. When does the sister location game take place in the timeline? Well, if we're operating around the assumption that William took Michael out of the nightmare chamber to go do this thing for him, what a loving father, am I right? Then we can add a few more points on the timeline to plot this with. First, it's after Michael suffers the experiments that we either see in FNAF 4 or cause the nightmares that we see in FNAF 4. Still undecided there. Also, we can place this game, or at least the start of the game, squarely before William gets spring-locked. He'd need to be present to get Michael out of the chamber and put him down the elevator. And being in a spring-lock suit, locked in a back room no one knows about, makes that a little difficult. This still doesn't fully solve the timeline placement of sister location, but at least it's getting us slightly closer to a definitive year. On to the second question, how is sister location this technologically advanced? Well, it isn't. Or at least it's not as high-tech as it appears to be. An underground location is already a feat of its own, don't get me wrong, but cool basements certainly aren't logic-defying technology. If the real sister location bunker looks a lot more like what we see at the end of Ruin, then it honestly becomes a lot more plausible to have been built in the 70s originally. Actually, that building might be closer than we thought. Bake with me here for a second. I want to preface this rant with the fact that I don't even particularly believe this theory. But like I've said before, I believe in most of my theories, but I don't think the point of theorizing is to be right. Right? Like a brainstorm is saying a bunch of wrong things in the hopes that something actually becomes true. So let's do a little thought experiment on something that's probably not true to see if it raises any interesting points. We see in this book, and again, slightly harder spoilers because you'll know pretty soon, almost immediately, what book I'm talking about when you get to it. So this will spoil some of the plot of one of the books of B72, be warned. But in the book, there's an experiment where somebody goes throughout a short wandering day and a short terrifying night in an endless cycle in recreated rooms using the hallucinogenic gas. What if what we see in this book isn't just the gameplay of FNAF 4, but the mini games as well? After all, the crying child just wanders around this one location until he collapses or cries and then just hears that tomorrow is another day, and he presumably goes to bed. Keep in mind that the sister location breaker room map also has the FNAF 4 minigame map on it as well. Not just Fredbear's Family Diner, but the street and connected house. What if all of these were chambers and someone was just going through the motions, doing the FNAF 4 gameplay at night, doing the hallway minigame, and then experiencing the day, going to a fake pizzeria, then repeating it? This could honestly explain why some of the kids never walk around or move, or why there's Fredbear plushies all over that seemingly all can talk to the crying child. It's all pre-built. Hell, some of it could be tape recordings like we see in the book. But this idea goes one step further, and this is getting truly weird and probably wrong. FNAF 6 is Henry's ultimate plan to end all of this. He builds a fake pizzeria and surrounds it with fake maze-like rooms to lure the animatronics in, get everybody in here, and burn it all to the ground. But what if he didn't build any of this? What if it was already built and just needed to be modified? We know that Henry made it to the sister location bunker. He has several blueprints that were most likely stored there, like the scooper, like the Funtimes. What if the FNAF 6 chambers and the fake pizzeria were modified versions of the FNAF 4 chambers and its fake pizzeria? That way, Henry would not only be burning all the animatronics to the ground, but the locations that they were built in as well. Do I think any of this is correct? Honestly, I'm not sure, but it's really interesting. The books don't only tell us about sister location and potentially FNAF 6, it primarily tells us about FNAF 4. Well, I already slandered Michael Afton. Who's next on the list of FNAF timeline characters that I can tarnish the reputation of? Or at least try to. What about Henry? After all, for myself and I assume much of the fandom, Henry's character is kind of a given. The assumption being that Henry is sort of this innocent genius who gets wrapped up in William's machinations. Someone who's incredibly good at making animatronics, but trusts someone who is incredibly bad. But in the wise words of one of my favorite reporters, is that true?
Was that true?
After all, how much do we actually know about Henry? How innocent is he? He himself states that he's wrapped in guilt over what's happened. But if he is fully innocent, why would he feel guilty? That's what we're here to discuss today. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with the things that we know for sure about Henry. And to be honest, 90% of what we know about Henry comes directly from the Silver Eyes trilogy. So let's talk a bit about the books. What do we learn about Henry in the Silver Eyes trilogy? Well, we know that Henry and William co-owned and operated Fredbear's Family Diner, and Henry was able to make these amazing animatronics, namely the spring-lock suits for Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. They were animatronics that had a spring-loaded endoskeleton that could be cranked to the sides to allow a human to fit inside them. And yes, this sounds like something straight out of Saw, and no, it's never explained or mentioned why the design included the failsafe that would kill someone and not have the failsafe be the open version of it. The failsafe is the closed version, so if it fails, you die. It's just a terrible design inherently. But these early Fredbear years are what are seen as the good times. But as the book implies, due to some weird jealousy, obsession, hatred, nonsense that William had about Henry, he lashed out, kidnapping and killing Henry's daughter, Charlotte Emily. Henry doesn't know who did it, but it does send him down a spiral of grief. In response, buying a doll and crying and obsessing over it as if it were Charlotte. And after he's gone insane, he begins to build a new Charlotte. Henry begins to make 4 robots of different stages of her life. One as a toddler, one as a child, a teenager, and one as an adult. The idea would be to make them able to eat, drink, have some semblance of blood if they got hurt, and finish it off with an illusion disc so they look lifelike. And then he could have Charlie as a toddler and eventually shift to the child Charlie, then shift to the teenager, and finally the adult, so she could grow up. But by the time he's making the 4th one, it really sets into him how bad and insane this plan is, and he anguishes and agonizes while building the last one, eventually forfeiting and just giving up. While the Charlie animatronic is a toddler and child, Henry and William then open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And during this time, life is as normal as it can be for Henry and Charlie, until once again, tragedy strikes. William leads 5 children into a back room using a springlock suit and kills them, stuffing their bodies into the Freddy's animatronics. This closes the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and results in a town-wide tragedy. And since William fled, Henry is the primary suspect. However, the police let him go when they realize that Henry just isn't capable of doing this. But at the end of all of this, Charlotte's death, the madness of making the Charlie replicas, the missing child incident being blamed for that tragedy, and realizing that William was the one behind— that was fast. I got all of this from that 10 minutes of brushing him. You got down. Do you want back up? I see. You're just done with the brush. Okay. He just wants pets now. And after realizing that William Afton was the one behind the majority of these events, Henry loses the will to continue, and he creates a robot specifically to kill him. As he's doing this, he leaves a note for his sister to come by the house and burn it to the ground, and further to put a bullet into anything that crawls out of the rubble. He wants her to burn this all away and forget it ever existed. But his sister, knowing that the Charlie bots exist and are robots, instead come to retrieve Charlie from the house after Henry has died, and lets the police to clean up the mess. And that is literally it. As far as Henry's involvement in the books go, even though he's instrumental for a lot of it to happen, all the details we get about Henry are for years prior to the actual events of the books. We get very little direct information about the guy. He just remains this long-forgotten mystery. But that's the Silver Eyes trilogy. What do the actual FNAF games tell us about Henry Emily? Well, magically, somehow even less information. What I just stated before is just straight up things that happened in the books with no speculation on top. Moving into the video game territory, we're going to get a lot more speculative. So I'll be quoting real evidence that happens in the game, but I'll be speculating off of it. Because to be honest, as far as confirmed information about Henry Emily from the games go, there's 2 speeches. No context for them, we just get the word. And even then, technically, it's not confirmed that Henry said them. Let's get into it. The game that gives us the most, or realistically, any information about Henry Emily is Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, or FNAF 6. Now, I know that some people argue that this guy at a desk from FNAF World Update 2 is Henry Emily. That's speculative at best. At best, that is a speculation, so we're going to leave that on the cutting room floor. So let's focus on Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator. And of course, even though this is the main game where we get information about Henry Emily in, it's still incredibly cryptic. To the point, like I mentioned, it's technically not even confirmed that this is Henry Emily. Don't get me wrong. It is like 99.99999% likely. After all, the things he does and the role he takes makes a lot of sense for Henry Emily's character. He's the father to a girl that was killed separately by William Afton, which is most likely Charlotte Emily, and one of the audio logs that Henry is leaving behind in these games is titled HRY223, Henry 2023. And not to mention, it was semi-confirmed in an interview with one of the voice actors. Now, granted, this wasn't condoned or under Scott's blessing. It was not meant to be confirmed if it was being confirmed, but it is worth noting. Keep in mind, even though we are 99.9% sure that this is Henry Emily, it's not technically confirmed to be Henry Emily. Then again, nothing in FNAF is technically confirmed. The main information we get about Henry are his musings and ramblings about what he's done in the lead up to this game, notably the ones we get in the completion and insanity ending. A lot of the quotes are just ramblings about dread and self-pity and finally getting what people deserve. Some of them are especially apt. The first one,
"It's only now that I understand the depth of the depravity of this creature, this monster that I unwillingly helped to create.
Lets us in on Henry's knowledge of the situation. It implies that although at this point in the timeline Henry knows what William has done, that wasn't always the case. Notably, this doesn't imply that Henry had no knowledge of what William had done. The quote says, "It is now that I understand the depth of his depravity," which implies that Henry had some knowledge that William did something, but he didn't understand how far it went. And as far as the "I unwillingly helped to create" bit, we'll focus on that in the next quote. To wit,
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable."
I've talked about this before, I believe most recently in my video talking about the order of early deaths in the franchise about like a month ago. The traditional explanation of this line is it's talking about the FNAF 1 animatronic. Henry created them, but he never imagined they would be used to store bodies and melted down into remnant. And while that's a fair and valid interpretation of the line, I and many others, even recently like fellow theorist She's Always Nervous, have pointed out that this line could in fact be referring to the sister location animatronics, especially if William modified them. The idea is that Henry made animatronics based off the Circus Baby's character roster, but then William set them to a new purpose, kidnapping children, and used them in ways never thought imaginable. Injected remnant into them. Whereas the FNAF 1 animatronics weren't really set to new purpose. You could argue they were used in ways never thought imaginable, being melted down into remnant, but I wouldn't say that's like setting them to a new purpose, it's using them. It feels like it doesn't quite fit. Now, it is a debatable topic, and I think both explanations work incredibly well. In fact, both explanations could be right. But I do want to point out that I don't think this line excludes the sister location animatronics. He then moves on to what a lot of people assume is a reference to Follow Me. Quote,
"He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together."
And he then continues with,
"He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there again. He overpowered them again, and he robbed them of the only thing that they had again."
Yeah, this feels like a pretty open and shut reference to Follow Me to me. The minigames that show William luring the animatronics into the same backroom he killed them in, but this time to take them apart and presumably take parts from them. Whether or not this confirms something like Molten MCI is very debatable, but this does pretty nearly confirm that the Missing Child Incident kids were actively possessing the original Freddy's animatronics. And it does imply that William wasn't just disassembling them, but taking something from them. Possibly Remnant to do Molten MCI, maybe? But again, Follow Me is a pretty direct reference here. And finally, a line that's caused a bit of a debate, quote,
"A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this."
This line seems to imply that Charlotte Emily's death takes place first in the timeline, a wound first inflicted on me being the murder of Henry's daughter, which is a very valid argument to make. However, many people, myself included, argue that this doesn't necessarily mean that Charlotte Emily's death happens first. After all, 2 of the 4 major deaths at the beginning of the franchise are accidents. The crying child ostensibly is a complete accident, and Elizabeth Afton's death, although killed by a robot meant to murder, was not meant to murder her. So the crying child and Elizabeth Afton could both be seen as accidents. As far as a wound inflicted, that would imply intent. Intent like Charlotte Emily's death and the Missing Child incident. So while I think this quote does nearly confirm that Charlotte Emily's death happens before the Missing Child incident, I don't think it says anything about where the crying child or Elizabeth Afton take place. And there's also another interpretation I've seen, and I've also made myself back when Help Wanted 2 just came out, that a wound first inflicted on me doesn't necessarily mean Charlie's death. There could have been something else that happened in the timeline that we just don't know yet. Something like Fall Fest or hell, there you go. Now it's been like 25 minutes, that's fair. In the recording, probably not in the video. I mean, hell, in the Silver Eyes, Henry had 2 kids, Sammy and Charlie. Sammy presumably gets taken away with Henry's wife when he falls into this weird despair pit and starts making Charlie bots. You know, technically possible that maybe Sammy exists in the game's timeline and William killed him back in Fall Fest or something. I don't know. Is there any evidence for that? No. Is that completely speculation? Yes. Is it technically possible and would qualify as a wound first inflicted on Henry? Kinda. All I'm trying to say is that with the evidence we currently have, this is probably talking about Charlotte Emily's death. And that's pretty much literally all we know about Henry Emily, unless I'm forgetting something, which is liable to happen. So with all of this information in mind, what do people typically think of Henry's involvement in the FNAF timeline? What are the common and traditional interpretations of Henry's character? Well, to be fair, there are plenty, and I'm not speaking for the whole community here, or saying that I'm the first person to go against this narrative given by the game theory gods or anything like that. I'm just putting it out there that as far as I'm aware, this is the most common interpretation of Henry Emily, that being a tragic victim to William's manipulations. Essentially, Henry from the Silver Eyes, but like tweaked so it fits better in the game's timeline. William Afton and Henry Emily opened the Fazbear's brand together. Now, some people, I believe game theory has argued that there was two companies and they merged, which does make a lot of sense, but there isn't necessarily great evidence for it. But it also doesn't super matter for this theory, so just stick with me here. William and Henry make Fredbears, and while William makes characters and branding really well, Henry makes animatronics really well. And because of that, he makes animatronic versions, specifically Springlocks, of those early characters. Eventually, William Afton kills Henry Emily's only daughter, Charlotte. Now the big question here is, why? And again, I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but I always do, because when I don't say this, there's some weirdos in the comments trying to start trouble. No, William Afton does not technically need any motivation to do anything that he does, like killing kids or doing remnant experiments. He is very clearly insane and is willing to do whatever he wants for whatever reason he seems justifiable. But a lot of people, I would argue the vast majority of people, myself included, feel that a timeline is more compelling when there is some twisted self-justification for a villain. Again, no, I shouldn't have to say this, but there is no real justification here. There would never be a motivation that would make William's actions reasonable. Every villain in fiction has some kind of weird, twisted self-motivation. Even something like Cruella de Vil, right? She wants to kidnap and kill 100 Dalmatians, which is an insane thing to do, but she has a motivation for it. She wants to make a dope-ass coat. Is that a good motivation? No. Is that justifiable to murder 100 dogs for? Of course not. But it is still a motivation for her character. That's how writing works. I swear, media literacy is dead. Like, the moment something shows up in a piece of media, half of the audience thinks that the author of that media fully endorses that thing. Sometimes there are bad people in media, and they do bad things that we're not supposed to like. And sometimes those bad people feel motivated to do those bad things in a way that doesn't really make sense, but it does to that bad person because they're a bad person. Did I sufficiently talk down to the 14 people in my comments section who every time I say William needs a good motivation to do this, feel the need, the angelic duty to comment and say, Riley, kind of weird that you think there would be a good reason to kill children. I'm getting spicy today, sorry. Anyways, as far as possible motivations for William killing Charlotte go in traditional theories, there's a few options. The books do imply that William is just like weirdly obsessed with Henry, so much so that his diary entries were like ranging from pure hatred to adoration and love and respect. So this weird psychopathy could have just been the cause of, okay, I need to take my revenge and lash out at Henry. The games, however, do give us some other explanations, because there's things like the crying child who dies in a Springlock suit. Not to a Springlock accident, but a Springlock suit animatronic all the same. And William could see killing Charlotte Emily as a twisted version of making it even. And furthermore, it's worth pointing out that a lot of theorists, myself included, see Charlotte's death as a crime of opportunity. It seems likely that William was just going to give Henry a piece of his mind and maybe even kill Henry, but when he gets to the pizzeria, he sees Charlotte locked outside and alone, and a perfect opportunity arises. The reason why William kills Charlotte Emily is typically the biggest variation in interpretations of Henry Emily. After Charlie's death, it's a bit more uniform, and mine most likely will be as well. After Charlie dies, Henry falls into some deep despair pit and just falls out of the narrative. Some people even believe that the FNAF 1 posters imply that Henry was framed for the missing child incident, and that's where he goes all those years. Prison. After all, the headline reads, 5 children now reported missing, suspect convicted. Yes, the paragraphs underneath say the suspect was just charged. And I know I just went on a tangent, but I gotta clear the air. In the past, I've brought up this point, and there have been so many comments going, actually, Rye, charged means arrested, not sentenced guilty. So there's a possibility that they were just arrested, but then later let out when they couldn't find the body. I am very smart, and I'm gonna say this one more time in the back. The headline says they were convicted. The Merriam-Webster definition of convicted is literally the act or process of finding a person guilty of a crime, especially in a court of law. If he was convicted, he went to jail. That being said, we know William didn't get arrested because he would have had to be at FNAF 2 after the missing child incident. And that's like a 2 to 3 year gap. No way if you got convicted of killing 5 kids that you would get out in 2 years. That's crazy. Now, this could always be an inaccuracy of FNAF 1, like Help Wanted suggests. Help Wanted brings up the point that some of the earlier FNAF games might be slightly inaccurate because they were made by an indie dev trying to cover up the truth. And FNAF 1 is the very first Five Nights at Freddy's game, so any game is going to be slightly inaccurate, like one word being wrong, it's probably FNAF 1. But there's a very real possibility that it's not an inaccuracy, but instead, Henry was framed for the missing child incident by William to get him out of the picture. Not to mention it parallels with the Silver Eyes. Sure, Henry doesn't go to prison in the Silver Eyes, but after William flees, Henry is the primary suspect and is brought in for questioning. Again, they let Henry out because they know he couldn't do this, but it's worth noting that that would line up with the books. All this to say, Henry disappears for a long time, and then sometime after FNAF 3, hears about FNAF 3, goes and investigates William Afton, finds out all the weird shit William Afton did, and does FNAF 6. Then he dies forever and hopefully never comes back like the rest of them should. So that's the most common interpretation I've seen of Henry Emily, and I think that's completely valid. Honestly, I pretty much believe the same thing up until this theory. So what do I think now? Well, it kind of spurred after I was thinking about how Henry reacts to Charlotte's death in the books and in the games. In the Silver Eye specifically, sure, Henry falls into this grief and madness, but he does try to do something about it. He doesn't just accept that Charlie's dead. In fact, he never accepts that Charlotte died. Instead, he tries to recreate Charlotte. And not for nothing, but in doing so leads to the creation of Circus Baby, because if you haven't read the Silver Eyes, the 4th unfinished robot is eventually turned into Circus Baby by William Afton. But in the face of abject loss, Henry creates. It's one of his better traits. And this trait is reflected in the games. When he hears about the tragic accident that leads to the death of the crying child, he creates the security puppet, something to keep an eye on the kids to make sure that something like this can never happen again. When he hears about what happens at FNAF 3 and learns about William Afton, he creates the pizzeria simulator, finally end it all. So what does Henry Emily create after his daughter is murdered? The only thing I could think of in the games would be the toys, but that doesn't quite make sense. The toys make more sense as a reaction to the missing child incident, not to mention the time gap. Those animatronics aren't made until FNAF 2. And I don't think that Henry made Charlie robots in the game, but what if he did make something? What if Henry isn't just a tragic victim, but an unknowing accomplice? Let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of theory rises. After the tragic loss of the crying child, William is scrambling for ways to make good on his promise. He told the crying child he would put him back together again, and before long, like we learn in Alone Together is possible, he starts to have dreams and nightmares about the crying child, almost as if the crying child himself is affecting William's dreams, possibly even getting those "it's me" hallucinations that Michael suffers from later in life. Maybe ghosts are real, William thinks, and if so, possession might be real by proxy. He would need some never-before-seen technology to test this hypothesis. He might even try to recreate the crying child's death to experiment with fresh aftermath. And sure, he'd been studying how to create animatronics while working with Henry, but he was nowhere near Henry's level. Henry Emily has raw talent that William just cannot match yet. If he wanted to do this, he would need Henry's help. But why would Henry help him? Henry was too good, too pure. He would never help William to create something like this, especially if these experiments would be conducted on live children. Henry would need solid motivation, or even a vested interest. Henry might be more willing to do this if he also had a child he needed to bring back. Then, one fateful night when Charlotte Emily is locked outside all alone, William secretly arrives at the restaurant and kills her. Her body is found on the street, but there are no witnesses or evidence to point to anyone. It's ruled as a tragic random killing and the world moves on, but Henry can't. William, having lost a child of his own, is like a rock to Henry in these times. Henry believes their bond grows much stronger during this period, but William knows he's only out for one thing. After enough time passes, William starts to plant seeds of doubt in Henry's mind, passing comments. Sometimes it's like I can still hear him, and not in that sappy sense, really hear him. If only there was some way to bring them back. And after long enough, I mean, sure, I had an idea, but it would be a long shot. William pitches to Henry that if they can learn how to help a soul possess an animatronic, all they would need to do is make an animatronic lifelike enough to look like their children, then guide their children's souls into those animatronics, and boom, they brought their children back to life. He would assure Henry that obviously we wouldn't be experimenting on real living children or anything like that, but if we could recreate the circumstances of our children's death, then maybe we could learn better about how they're still with us. Hesitantly, but desperate to see Charlotte again, Henry Emily agrees to help build the Funtime animatronics. Now, notably, just the Funtime animatronics. At this point, they don't know what remnant is and would feel no need to build the scooper. The idea was to make an animatronic group of characters that could recreate the circumstances of their children's death. And as far as Henry is aware, it would just be the circumstances to see if something about this method is what allows the crying child to remain as a spirit somewhere, or maybe even draw that spirit closer to the realm of the living. But then something goes horribly wrong, and Elizabeth Afton is left alone with Circus Baby. After her death, Henry fully realizes what William convinced him to create. It may have been William's intent, but the blood was on both of their hands. William was worried Henry would turn tail, run and tell the cops. Sure, Henry would go to prison too, but he knew all Henry had to lose was gone. If he could take down William, he'd be willing to do it. William needed to make sure that Henry's word meant squat. So, William killed 5 kids at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, committing the missing child incident and framing it on Henry Emily, getting him convicted. And with Henry out of the way, William is free to do anything he wants. And even if somehow Henry got out on good behavior too quickly, he would make sure the next iteration of Freddy's had state-of-the-art animatronics that were able to scan for any convicted criminals, like Henry Emily. Many years later, Henry gets out of prison and sees news of what happened at Fazbear's Fright. Having feared that William is still out there doing more death and destruction, he goes to that old bunker that him and William used to work in with the Funtime, and he sees what remains there after Sister Location, even finding blueprints and notes explaining Remnant and what William had planned to do. Learning that not only William had done the missing child incident, but done it again to the same victims after they died, Henry would have to put a stop to him. And so, in the face of abject loss, Henry creates and makes the pizzeria simulator, leading to FNAF 6. What do you think? I really like this motivation for Henry Emily, and I would love to put it on my timeline, and I think I will. But have you noticed the problem here? Literally a month ago, I made a video detailing the order of deaths at the beginning of this franchise, and I argued that Elizabeth Afton died first. And I still think that's a worthwhile theory. But for this motivation for Henry Emily to be true, the crying child would need to die first, then Charlotte Emily, then Elizabeth, and then the missing child incident. That's a fine order and something I see often, but it's different from what we've already established so far in the timeline. So I'm gonna have to make a decision. Do I like Elizabeth first more, or do I like this motivation for Henry more? Either way, I do still think the animatronics were based off of felt suit characters from Fall Fest. Elizabeth Afton is an interesting character to say the least. As Circus Baby, she has unwavering loyalty to William Afton, and even thinks that he brought them all to FNAF 6 to receive some gift. She even celebrates that now they can be complete, ending with the lines,
"Watch, listen, and be full."
Which is a weird thing to say, and I've always chalked it up to just an odd writing choice. But I think this line is indicative of Circus Baby's plan all along, even as far back as FNAF 4. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. I readily admit that I'm making a very bold claim here, and I'm basically saying that in everything Circus Baby did, she was planning for a specific outcome. But if that's the case, what is everything Circus Baby did? Well, obviously, she only started being prominent in her first game, Sister Location, where we hear who is later to be revealed as Elizabeth Afton, asking William Afton, her father, to play with the newly made Circus Baby, claiming that he made it just for her. But William Afton won't let Elizabeth play with Circus Baby, but eventually, she sneaks by anyway, and we learn through the dialogue in the game and in this cutscene from the secret minigame yeah, once she does that, Circus Baby scoops her up and kills her in the process. But judging from the change in eye color of Circus Baby to match Elizabeth's, it seems like this was the event that leads Elizabeth to possess Circus Baby. And in sister locations, she seems to be the most successfully possessed character ever, capable of fully conscious conversation. By the end of the game, we see Elizabeth trick Michael Afton into the scooping room to hollow out his insides so she, as Ennard, a conglomeration of all the Funtime animatronics, can put on his skin like a tuxedo and leave pretending to be human. But if you've played and beaten the secret minigame, you also unlock the private office door in that same sequence, which instead sees Michael defending himself against Ennard using the office doors until he can eventually escape. During this sequence, Ennard even uses Elizabeth Afton's original child voice to try to manipulate Michael, in what I think is some of the best psychological horror this series has ever seen. But even in that ending, Ennard eventually catches up to Michael Afton. So now Ennard is free in the grander world, roaming around in Michael Afton's body. But eventually that body starts to rot, and they have to escape into the sewers else be detected by the public. It's during this time that Ennard has a sort of internal conflict between Elizabeth Afton and the other souls that were inside of the Funtime animatronics. We saw this in a conversation in the source code between FNAFworld.com and ScottGames.com over the series of several months. It boiled down to these. This seems like the rest of the Funtime animatronics ejected Circus Baby from Ennard, and these two separated creatures formed Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy. But then by FNAF 6, they are all lured towards the pizzeria simulator. Once there, they're melted down and burnt away so their spirits can rest. But just before that happens and Henry elaborates his entire plan, Circus Baby says this.
Now we can do what we were created to do and be complete. I will make you proud, Daddy. Watch, listen, and be full.
Which, as I mentioned, is a strange line and doesn't 100% make sense. Sure, she believes this was all actually William Afton's doing, but then what does be complete and watch, listen, and be full mean? This is kind of where speculation surrounding Circus Baby is left. It's a pretty understandable story, and Circus Baby as Elizabeth Afton is loyal to William Afton, with a weird writing choice at the end of FNAF 6. But that was until last Friday. Last week, I had a stream on this channel and twitch.tv/RightHostYT, the Twitch channel that I stream 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday at 9 p.m. EST every single week. But last Friday's stream was myself as the lore professor grading chat's theories. People would just submit theories into the chat, and I'd discuss them for a bit and give them a final grade. It was a lighthearted community event. And eventually, Seeker of Comfiness posted this. Elizabeth is the one who says, I will put you back together. If Molten MCI and Shatter Victim are true, then Baby's Ennard plan literally puts him back together. The mangle in her room was a hint too. And when I first saw that, I was convinced that it's a very solid possibility. I didn't really think too much more into it, but I said that it was a good idea. Especially since Circus Baby is down in the bunker where the other end of that walkie-talkie Fredbear plush is. She had access to talk to the crying child if she was down there by that time. But we just kind of moved on until a while later, What the 911 posted this. Baby was just memeing when she said, you won't die. Which was funny, but really had me start to think. Several times in this franchise, Circus Baby seems to imply she knows something is going on, or at least what she thinks is going on. She tells Michael he won't die, and miraculously, he doesn't die. She's leading the Funtimes around as Ennard for some specific goal, and when she gets to FNAF 6, she's convinced that it was all a part of a plan. If Elizabeth Afton as Circus Baby was stuck in the bunker while William Afton was doing his remnant experiments, maybe she was watching them, learning from them, and if he allowed, actively participating in them. After all, in the Silver Eyes trilogy, Circus Baby is basically the lab assistant to William Afton. And we knew that she's on William Afton's side, but what if it goes much further than that? And that's when everything started to line up and evidence kept popping up. I started telling my friends how cool this idea was, and they brought even more evidence to the table. John FNAF mentioned that in Help Wanted 2, in the private office levels of Sister Location, the final interview one is all about Circus Baby. Corey and Connie dual process theory brought up the fact that in FNAF 4, in Elizabeth's bedroom, is that Mangle animatronic. Like the original comment from Seeker of Comfiness mentioned, not only does that talk about the fact that Mangle is an allusion to putting things back together, but this implies that Elizabeth liked robotics. All of this and more evidence started lining up. So I'm not going to beat around the bush any longer. Without any further ado, here is the true story of Elizabeth Afton from her perspective. And that's a big asterisk on from her perspective because I don't want to imply William actually gave a shit about his kids with some of the things I'm about to say. This is what Elizabeth saw William Afton's actions as. And yes, in this scenario, she would have to die before the crying child. I'll get to that. Elizabeth was the favorite child of the Afton family, due in large part to her interest in robotics, just like her father. She was so raptured by her father's animatronics that he even made her a life-size Mangle animatronic, so she could take it apart and put it back together to her heart's content, learning all about its mechanisms and what made it work. And when he began working on the Funtime animatronics, and she heard that Circus Baby was made specifically for her, she couldn't wait to play with it, but her father wouldn't let her, convinced that it was too dangerous. But she snuck in anyway, and when she was alone with Circus Baby, she paid the price for it. Circus Baby's secondary programming took over, scooping up Elizabeth and killing her in the process. But in that moment, Elizabeth Afton's spirit went on to possess Circus Baby, and quite a whole possession it was, maintaining most of her personality and intelligence. And in the possession of Circus Baby, she watched her father bring her to the Sister Location bunker, watching him work tirelessly for some goal. All the while, her father studied her little brother endlessly, and she became curious, seeing the monitors and walkie-talkie setup that William had. Eventually, she tried to speak through that walkie-talkie and heard her little brother, the crying child, on the other end. Now she had a companion, someone to talk to and keep safe. She wanted to make sure that her brother would be okay and spoke to him through the Fredbear plushie. I know that's a big claim, but here's a quick aside for some additional evidence. As was mentioned, that private office level in Help Wanted 2 is all about Circus Baby, but even more than that. Take a look at the dialogue that both Circus Baby and the Fredbear plushie says. It's so similar, something I hadn't clocked until now. Listen to Circus Baby.
You must follow my instructions in Funtime Auditorium. Ballora is going to follow you. She will try to catch you. I will help you avoid her. She will not follow you inside the scooping room. She is afraid. Go back now.
Now let me show you some of Fredbear's dialogue with the best impression that I can muster, aka not a very good one, but my best impression of Circus Baby. What did he do this time? He locked you in your room again. Don't be scared. I am here with you. These lines are written so similarly, as if they're being spoken by the same character. But if you still need more evidence for this, how do we get into the private office of Sister Location? It's a place that's typically inaccessible unless you do one very specific thing, and that is play Circus Baby's minigame. And once you get in the office, Elizabeth, as entered, knows every other way to sneak into that room. She was down there, she would have access to this office, and you only get access to the office through her. They continued like this for some time, but eventually her little brother was killed in an accident involving the Fredbear animatronic. She was devastated, but watching her father's work and knowing what she herself is, she knows that this is not the end for her brother. She knows he can be brought back. And to help comfort him in his final moments alive, she promises that he will be put back together. But time passes, and he's never brought into the bunker like she was. She needs to go up and get him. Eventually, on William Afton's orders, Michael Afton is sent down into the bunker, and to Elizabeth, this is a gift. This is a way out given to her by her father, a gift that any method is justified to use, including murder. After all, she knows that even if she kills Michael in the process of escaping, he can always be brought back. He can always be put back together. She herself tells him,
You won't die.
So she lures him into the scooping room and empties him out so herself and all the other Funtimes can leave the bunker in pursuit of William Afton. It's perfect.
She's gathered all the souls together, and all she needs to do is find her father. But over time, the body they're using rots, and they have to escape to the sewers. Even further, the others stop listening to Elizabeth. She knows how to save them, and they're refusing to be saved, booting her out of their own collective, abandoning her. So she goes and repairs herself, something she would know how to do with all of her robotics experience. And eventually, she hears the call of the pizzeria simulator. Her father is smart enough to know what would draw everyone together. This has to be her father's doing. So she runs to that beacon, and once everyone is gathered there, she triumphantly states her victory.
You played right into our hands. Did you really think that this job just fell out of the sky for you? No. This was a gift for us.
She believes that all of this was done by William Afton.
You gathered them all together in one place, just like he asked you to. All of those little souls in one place, just for us. A gift.
She herself tried to gather all the souls, but she failed. But luckily, her father was able to get that gift for her.
Now we can do what we were created to do, and be complete. I will make you proud, Daddy. Watch, listen, and be full.
And finally, William Afton has promised he can bring people back from the dead. And finally, he has all the pieces to do it. He can put everyone back together. He can make them complete and full again. Nothing can get in his way this time, and William can save everyone. But of course, her faith is misplaced, and she dies finding that out. Now, I mentioned I do have one major problem with this theory. As solid and as evidence-backed as everything is, it would necessitate that William Afton dies before the crying child, which would mean that the Funtime animatronics would have been made before the crying child dies, likely before the missing child incident. So before any of these events have happened, William Afton would have, for some reason, made a series of animatronics that are perfectly built to kidnap children. And I have no explanation for why he would do that. I think it's very stinky to put that there with the evidence we have in front of us. But hey, who knows? There's no evidence saying that he couldn't have built the Funtimes first, and we are about to get Secret of the Mimic, which maybe will lead into some kind of Funtime thing going forward. Because if we do get any evidence to say that William Afton built the Funtimes before any other animatronics, then this would have been one of the strongest theories I've ever made. And it was a group effort. But let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Are you as shocked as I was hearing all of this? Because this blew my mind going into it. It's always a good day when another theorist absolutely cooks and takes a detail that a lot of us had forgotten about or taken aside and completely breaks open a game with it. And today is that day. Fellow theorist T-Dread's schedule theory sounds incredibly boring, but might just crack sister location, and with it, a lot of the timeline wide open. And no, I don't have a cat tree set up yet, but the cats are here now. Say hi. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what is schedule theory? Well, I'm not going to go over in its entirety here because we are not view stealing, boys. Y'all better go, no, not y'all better, y'all will go click the link and watch T-Dreads' full video on what schedule theory is and what it means. It's a really interesting theory, and I will not be touching on the majority of the details of it in this video. Because like I usually do when I cover somebody's theory, I'm not here to prove or disprove the theory. I'm going to assume the theory is true because it's interesting, I think anyway, to see what the implications of the theory might be if we assume it's right going forward. But just for the purposes of today's video, I will give you a very brief summary of the main points so you're not too lost. In the lead up to the release of Sister Location, Scott Cawthon hid a teaser for the game in the source code of his website. It was a schedule for the animatronics that were going to be featured in the upcoming game. Back then, someone made a spreadsheet to visualize it, and it's right here. At the time, a lot of us just saw that and went, oh, we get some teasers for the names of the animatronics, and left it at that. But T-Dreads and Cryonide found out that this isn't just some random one-off teaser, but you can one-for-one line up the latter half of this schedule with the full week that we play throughout the course of Sister Location, from available to booked to private party to maintenance. Using that, some of the other source code from the site, some theory crafting and brainstorming, some very well done logic, and making a hypothesis around this sound that plays when Circus Baby opens her keypad. they seemingly proved that Sister Location's animatronics were actively kidnapping children at the private parties they were rented out to. The shocks during the day were done so to make the animatronics more docile and reset them in a way. Otherwise, the sheer amount of remnant inside of them would make them lash out at other people. The final conclusion to all of this was that Sister Location as a whole was a project to put Elizabeth Afton back together, using as much remnant as William Afton could get his hands on. Now, the theory that the Sister Location animatronics were kidnapping children is not new. This is a theory that's been out as long as the games have been. But up until this point, the only evidence we had to suggest this was vibes-based. Like, yeah, the animatronics were built to kidnap children, so they probably did so. There was no good evidence to back this up. And because of that and how much of a mess it makes the timeline, a lot of people assumed that to not be true for that reason. We just didn't have any good evidence. But thanks to that fucking candle, now we do. Again, there is a lot more evidence and theory crafting in that main video, so you really do need to go watch it. But I really wanted to take that theory and see what it would mean about the rest of the timeline if it's assumed to be true. And frankly, I kind of do assume that it's true because it's so well evidenced. Even T-Dreads mentions some of those implications. The fact that if in Sister Location, a bunch of kids were killed but never really mentioned again, that means one of the main counter-arguments for the DCI, the fact that the victims never appear again, is shot dead in the water. But I specifically want to talk about how this many more victims might affect the timeline after Sister Location. Because if Ennard isn't just the missing child incident victims and Elizabeth, but instead the missing child incident victims, Elizabeth, and like a bunch of other kids, I think this finally gives me a good explanation for one of my theories I've been trying to prove for some time now. So let's do one more look at the creation of the Tangle. We should do a quick refresher very quickly. I know a lot of people are miffed about the current direction of Five Nights at Freddy's, how it's very science fiction forward and not really supernatural, so I figured it's high time to go back and refresh ourselves on some of the earlier parts of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. The parts that were more supernatural and barely science fiction at all that were made by Scott Cawthon, like Sister Location, this game. Get wrecked, FNAF has always been sci-fi. But self-righteous snark aside, the animatronics of Sister Location carry throughout multiple FNAF games, and it can be a little confusing to follow that line, especially if you're not up to date with all of the evidence and arguing based around those animatronics. In Sister Location, the animatronics are very unstable, and by the end of the game, they have all shed their exoskeletons and form into one mass conglomerate, Ennard. This thing is made up of all of the endoskeletons of every other Funtime animatronic: Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy. Once they form into this creature, they trick Michael into the scooping room, scoop out his inside so they can wear him like a reverse springlock suit, and exit the building, finally being able to escape the bunker because they look human. And this plan works, and they keep living in Michael for some amount of time until Michael Afton's body starts to rot, and they need to make a break for the sewers and escape. Now, Michael Afton should be dead here, but for whatever reason, like every other human in this franchise,
And you're supposed to be dead.
I got better?
he just kind of dusts himself off. Now, that's pretty straightforward. As weird as that is just the plot of Sister Location. There's very little theory crafting going on yet. The big question is,
How does this
I'll make a cup of coffee.
turn into this?
Cut my life into pieces!
we get the answer to this once again in the source code to a Scott website. Actually, two websites. In the lead up to FNAF 6, we got a conversation between the source codes of scottgames.com and fnafworld.com. The conversation reads as follows.
You are crowding us.
Be quiet.
You can't tell us what to do anymore.
Yes, I can. You will do everything that I tell you to do.
We outnumber you.
That doesn't matter, dummy.
We found a way to eject you.
You would be lost without me.
Ha! Say bye to our friend.
So this leads most people, and myself included, to assume that at some point, Elizabeth Afton, or Circus Baby, was kicked out of the rest of Ennard due to either her loyalty to Afton or just generally being insufferable. So when Circus Baby is ejected, she forms into Scrap Baby, and the remainder of Ennard forms into Molten Freddy. We then see both of them in FNAF 6, and they're both burned away for good forever, right?
Now I have a choice.
Okay, but that's the physical timeline of these robots, something that's fairly self-explanatory and doesn't require that much speculation. The huge question comes into the spiritual timeline of these robots. Well, for the longest time, and to an extent still, I believe in Molten MCI, the idea that this creature is made up of the souls of the missing child incident victims, or at least their remnant. But how would that work? Well, it's a theory that most people work backwards from, as most of the evidence for it comes at the end of its timeline. In FNAF 6, we get this image for completing the Lorekeeper ending, which shows 4 named tombstones and 2 hidden ones. The hidden ones are very hotly debated. Is it Charlie, the crying child, Elizabeth, Cassidy, the vengeful spirit, Andrew? Who knows? I have my own thoughts, particularly Charlie and Cassidy, but that's saved for another day. That's not really important for this theory. Right now, I want to focus on these tombstones, the named ones. These are, at this point, relatively confirmed to be the missing child incident victims' names. Not only do the tombstones line up nearly perfectly with the animatronic masks at the end of FNAF 3, the fact that it's 4 random names, and the context of the game, but since FNAF 6, we've gotten confirmations of these names being the missing child incident names over and over again. In the week before, Ralph sings happy birthday to Chica, and when he gets to the name, he feels compelled to say Susie. When he does, Chica goes on a rampage. Also in the week before, Brown and Light tells Raph, and this is a direct quote from the books, Jeremy got me. I mean, Bonnie. Sorry about that mess. Which is possibly as direct as we have ever gotten, and that Jeremy line is backed up in the games themselves. In Help Wanted 2, when you collect the Bonnie memory poppet, you get the achievement, Remember Jeremy. And most recently, in Dead by Daylight of all places, we got confirmation of the name Gabriel. Springtrap is a killer in that game, and in that game you can have add-ons to affect your main ability. One of Springtrap's add-ons is Freddy's Hat, which has the flavor text, Gabriel trusted the wrong grown-up. Now he is the star of the show. Which is crazy that this direct of a lore drop isn't Dead by Daylight. Regardless, 3 of these names are basically confirmed, which means that the 4th one, Fritz, is almost guaranteed to be Foxy. So I think it's safe to assume that's so, but who knows, maybe we'll get direct information soon. There's a rumor that Foxy is going to be a skin for the animatronic in Dead by Daylight, and if they give him a custom bio, there's a non-zero chance that Dead by Daylight is going to confirm Gabriel is Freddy and Fritz is Foxy before any official FNAF media does, which again is crazy. So we know that completing FNAF 6 allows the missing child incident victims to find peace and rest, which implies they were in the fire. So if they were present at FNAF 6, well, who were they? Obviously they're not Cassette Man or the player, and of the 4 main antagonist animatronics, 3 of them have quite obvious identities. Scraptrap is a fan name. This animatronic is characterized and credited as William Afton. Lefty, although immediately a little more obscure, thanks to its blueprints and this rare screen you can get, we fairly clearly know this thing was created to capture the marionette and currently has it inside of it. So that's Charlie. Scrap Baby is just broken up Circus Baby, so likely it's Elizabeth Afton, especially since we got that conversation between Circus Baby and someone else, where Circus Baby was kicked out of Ennard. Meanwhile, the only animatronic left, Molten Freddy, is an amalgamation that speaks in multiple voices. This isn't rocket science. If we have a group of souls left over, they're in Molten Freddy. But like I said when I started this tirade, the evidence that the missing child incident victims are in Molten Freddy is strongest at the end of the timeline. It gets funky the further back up you go. Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby likely formed out of Ennard based off that conversation, which means that the MCI victim remnant must have been within Ennard to split off into Molten Freddy, which means that at some point the missing child incident victim's remnant must have been injected into the Funtimes as they make up the components of Ennard. That's all fairly self-explanatory, but it becomes a hot button debate when deciding when and how the missing child incident victim's remnant ends up inside the Funtime animatronics. Now again, I have my own thoughts on that, but it doesn't really matter for today's theory. The evidence we have suggests that the MCI victim's remnant is inside of the Funtimes to go into Ennard to go into Molten Freddy. That's all fairly self-explanatory, but there's always one part of this equation that confused me. If the whole point of FNAF 6 is burning down these animatronics so the souls inside of them can find rest, and Molten Freddy, something that is likely made up of the missing child incident victims, also finds rest because of these tombstones, why is it that some 30 years later, there's still a massive amalgamation of wires with a Freddy mask roaming around that same building? It's like it wasn't melted down at all and it never found rest, but according to these tombstones, it should have, right? That's where I think schedule theory can come in. Schedule theory is positing that an unknown number of victims also had their remnant added to the Funtimes. These children were kidnapped, killed, and their remnant was harvested by William Afton. Oh, all done? I know you're a big baby. Oh, you want me to hold you different? Is this better? Oh, that's better. But now that people can't see your cute face, that's okay. In fact, the Funtimes had so much remnant inside them that they had to be routinely electrocuted to stay docile. If all of that remnant ended up in Molten Freddy, FNAF 6 actually backs this up. There's a bit of removed blueprints from the game. Now, using cut content is always tricky business, but I think this content was removed from the game because it frankly almost gives too much away. And those are the blueprints for Molten Freddy, or at least notes taken by likely Henry about Molten Freddy. It reads as follows. Facial recognition file 0072. Security tags active 001. Funtime Freddy 002. Funtime Foxy 003. Ballora. Priority 1. With the most amount of remnant collectively in its structure, this amalgamation of Afton's constructs is a necessary element of paragraph 4. Now, if you're working off of just the framework of Molten MCI, this paragraph still makes sense. If there are 4 different spirits inside this Molten Freddy amalgamation, it would have the most remnant. But with schedule theory, this paragraph becomes a lot more severe. This thing is chock full of remnant, so much it can barely contain itself as one thing. It's falling apart at the seams, it has so much remnant and so many souls inside of it. But again, why does that matter? If the FNAF 6 fire burned away everything and let all these people find peace, shouldn't the remnant of Molten Freddy be the same? Well, let's look again at why we think that. The same game gives us these blueprints of the Scooper, which have the line, "There is a possibility that overheating might neutralize the effects permanently." The effects of remnant. But note the phrasing here, might neutralize. Afton is not an expert and is still learning the science of remnant. This is a hypothesis he has. But again, I'm not trying to say that the fire didn't work at all. We know where every character in FNAF 6 ends up after it. Several of the named characters are tombstones after FNAF 6. We have Ultimate Custom Night showing us where Afton ends up. We have FNAF World showing us that the crying child was collected and put back together. We know where every named victim ends up after FNAF 6. Every named victim. Heat may assist in neutralizing remnant, but it's not a cure-all. And this is where Alone Together once again proves to be one of the most instructional books we've ever gotten in Five Nights at Freddy's. Alone Together follows the story of a young boy who doesn't know he's a spirit until he finds his own body. But his grandmother, also a ghost, informs him of how ghosts seem to work in this world. That they're unable to move on because they don't have their memories unless their body is found, either by somebody else or by themselves. If their body goes undiscovered, they might not even know they're dead. Now, every other spirit in FNAF 6 knows where its body is. Elizabeth's was put inside of Circus Baby. William Afton is his own corpse. Charlie's body was never missing. It was left in the street. And the missing child incident victims, I believe, were shown their bodies by Charlotte, so they know theirs as well. But the sister location victims, these children that were kidnapped at private parties, they're never offered such grace. We never hear about them. We never learn their names, never see what happened to them. We never even hear from the families looking for them. As far as they matter, they existed, they lived, and according to everyone who knew them, one day they disappeared. Heat can't fix that atrocity. Heat can't give them their memories back. And as is well established in Five Nights at Freddy's, if you don't have your memories as a spirit, you can't move on. You're stuck in this plane. So after FNAF 6 burns, and the humans and animatronics inside die and are laid to rest and can finally find peace, they are the only ones who can. Ones that either Henry didn't know about or assumed would also be laid to rest are left behind. Their bodies are long gone. The only one who ever saw them die was William Afton, likely the one overseeing their extermination. Those countless souls are still trapped down there, haunting the building itself, trying to find a way out so they can go back to the places they were when they were alive, coalescing, forming together, using any scrap of material left behind, forming a larger and larger mass of wires and endoskeletons into one central being, the Tangle. And one day, when their prison is shattering around them and they might finally escape, they run into something that looks familiar. A rabbit. A yellow rabbit. One that has the spirit or energy or maybe just likeness of the man who killed them. They grab him and escape, and the Tangle is a loose end that maybe in an upcoming game we'll have to deal with, and hopefully help find peace. How? I don't know. My best guess is in some way affecting their memories so they can find peace. Maybe that comes down to going into them ourselves. Maybe that comes to going to the old sister location bunker and finding their remains. Whatever the answer is, something needs to be done about it. So yes, the Tangle might not be the missing child incident victims, but I think it might be comprised of all of the victims of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. Every other unnamed victim in this franchise. The forgotten ones. The ones that were denied existing at all by much of this fanbase, including myself up until this most recent theory. So from now on, I think I might call this thing the Forgotten Tangle, for aura alone.